What if the woman everyone calls intimidating is just someone who stopped apologizing for surviving? Think about that for a second. You've seen her. Maybe you are her. The woman in the room who doesn't perform, doesn't compete, doesn't chase. She's not trying to be mysterious. She just stopped explaining herself to people who were never really listening. She walks in and something shifts. Not because she demands attention, but because she doesn't need it. And that quietly terrifies people. Everyone looks at her and says the same thing. She was just born like that. Wrong. She wasn't born like that. Nothing about her came pre-assembled. Not the stillness, not the boundaries, not that unshakable, bone-deep sense of who she is and what she will not tolerate. Every single piece of her was built slowly, painfully, deliberately from the ruins of the person she used to be before the world showed her exactly what she was made of. She was forged. And there's a massive difference between being born and being forged. Something born enters the world soft, untested, and new. Something forged enters the world after fire, after pressure, after being shaped by forces that would have destroyed anything less real. A spicy lady isn't rare because she was handed something special at birth. She's rare because she walked through things that would have stopped most people. And she came out the other side knowing herself in a way that can never be taken away, that's what this is about. If you've ever felt like life keeps turning up the heat and you can't figure out whether you're breaking or becoming, stay here. Because by the time we're done, you're going to understand that the fire wasn't the problem. The fire was the point one. She was never normal, and she knew it young. It starts early. Almost always. There's this particular feeling that a lot of spicy lady carry from childhood. This low, steady hum of I don't quite belong here. Not in a dramatic, crying in the corner way. More like a quiet awareness that she was operating on a frequency nobody else seemed to be tuned into. She asked questions that made adults shift uncomfortably in their seats. She read situations and people with an accuracy that felt instinctive, but was really just a kind of hyper-awareness she didn't yet have a name for. She preferred depth over surface. One real conversation over 10 shallow ones, sitting with her own thoughts over being surrounded by noise that said nothing. And the world being what it is didn't celebrate any of that. It pathologized it. Too quiet, too serious, too sensitive, too intense. The message came from everywhere and it came early. Something about the way she was wired didn't match what the room required. Here's where the forging starts, because in that early gap between who she actually was and who the world wanted her to be, she made her first unconscious but defining choice. She chose herself. She didn't have language for it yet. She didn't frame it as strength. But she refused, even at 7 or 12 or 15, to fully become the version of herself that was designed for other people's comfort. That refusal, that's the first strike of the hammer. The first layer of who she becomes point 2. The wound that woke her up. Every spicy lady has one. Sometimes it's a relationship. Sometimes it's a loss. Sometimes it's a slow erosion. Years of giving and shrinking and quietly disappearing until one day something snaps into focus and she realizes she barely recognizes the woman in the mirror. The wound that woke her up is rarely the worst thing that ever happened to her. It's the thing that finally made her pay attention. Maybe it was the friendship that revealed itself to be entirely one-sided. The moment she stopped initiating and the entire relationship went silent and she realized it had never actually been a friendship at all. Maybe it was the partner who rewrote her reality so slowly and skillfully that she didn't notice until she was years in and couldn't remember the last time she trusted her own instincts. Maybe it was a family dynamic where love came pre-packaged with control and she finally got old enough and tired enough to name what it actually was. Whatever it was, it cracked her open. And here's what nobody tells you about being cracked open. It is the exact opposite of being destroyed. When you crack open, you finally see what was inside. You see the patterns you'd been repeating. You see the places where you'd been abandoning yourself in slow motion. You see the decisions you made from fear, from need, from a hunger for belonging that led you somewhere you never actually wanted to be. The wound that woke her up didn't break the spicy lady. It handed her the first real truth about herself she'd ever held clearly, and she didn't put it down. 3. Silence was her first superpower. While everyone else was performing, she was observing. This is something that gets misunderstood constantly. The spicy lady's quietness, Her tendency to listen more than she speaks, to watch more than she reacts, to think before she moves, gets read as shyness or coldness or disinterest. People fill her silence with their own projections because silence makes people uncomfortable and they'd rather label it than sit with it. But her silence was always a tool, even before she understood it as one. In environments where noise was currency and the loudest voice won, she was collecting something more valuable. Information. She was reading the room, not just what people were saying, but the gap between what they said and what they meant, the micro expressions, the deflections, the way someone's energy changed when a particular subject got touched. She couldn't always articulate what she was picking up on, but she felt it. And over time, through enough experiences of ignoring that feeling and paying the price, she learned to trust it without needing to explain it to anyone. That observational intelligence became one of her sharpest edges. It's why manipulation rarely sticks to her for long. It's why she walks into a room and within minutes has a sense of the dynamics at play that other people will take weeks to map out. It's not magic. It's years of paying attention while everyone assumed she was just being quiet point four. She burned in relationships and still chose herself, let's not skip past this one, because it's heavy and it's real. A spicy lady in her forming years almost certainly loved someone or multiple someones in a way that cost her enormously. Not because she was naive, not because she was foolish, but because she is underneath all that composure and self-sufficiency, someone who loves deeply. Someone who gives real, substantive, fully committed love when she decides someone is worth it, and that love, more than once, got used against her. She was called too much when she expected consistency. She was called distant when she needed space to process. She was pushed to perform emotional availability on someone else's timeline, to make herself smaller when her presence felt like a challenge, to accept less than she deserved because wanting more was framed as being difficult. And here's what the forging looks like in that fire. She didn't harden, not in the way bitterness hardens a person, closing them off and making every future relationship pay for the last one. Instead, she clarified. She got precise about what she needed. She stopped apologizing for her standards. She stopped accepting half presence as though it were the best she could get. The spicy lady who sits in front of you now, self-possessed, calm, selective, unimpressed by performance, was built in large part by the relationships that tried to diminish her and didn't fully succeed. Point 5. Solitude was a prison that became a palace. There's a version of aloneness that is just loneliness wearing a brave face. And then there's the kind of aloneness that builds something. The spicy lady found the second kind. Not immediately. At first, solitude probably felt like something was wrong. Like she'd been left out, left behind, or left over. Society applies enormous pressure to be constantly surrounded, constantly available, constantly connected. Being alone is positioned as a problem to be solved, not a condition to be cultivated. But she sat with it anyway, long enough to stop waiting for the discomfort to pass and start listening to what was underneath it. And in that space, no noise, no performance, no version of herself crafted for someone else's consumption, she found something extraordinary. She found her actual mind, her actual values, the things that genuinely moved her, made her curious, made her feel alive. Not the things she'd absorbed from her environment or inherited from the opinions of people she wanted to impress. Hers, original, specific, undeniably hers, solitude gave her herself back. And once you have that, once you know what it feels like to be genuinely, quietly, solidly yourself, you stop being willing to trade it away for a company that costs too much. Point 6. She unlearned everything they told her about being a woman. This is a layer of the forging that doesn't get talked about enough because it's uncomfortable to say out loud. A spicy lady at some point in her growth has to go to war with her own conditioning. The conditioning that told her a good woman is selfless to the point of self-erasure. The conditioning that framed her independence as a problem to be fixed by the right relationship. The conditioning that suggested her worth was tied to her agreeableness, how easy she was to be around, how little space she claimed, how smoothly she moved through social structures without disrupting anything. She was told that strength meant carrying things silently, that ambition needed to be dressed carefully so it didn't threaten anyone. That needing space was the same as being cold. That saying no was the same as being difficult. Unlearning that is not a gentle process. It involves choosing herself in moments when the old programming screams at her to shrink. It involves sitting with guilt, real guilt, the kind that has no logical basis but feels crushing anyway because she set a boundary or took up space or wanted something unapologetically. She does it anyway. Every time she does it anyway, something calcifies inside her. Not in a cold way, but in a solid way. She becomes harder to move from herself. The distance between who she is and who someone else needs her to be gets wider, and she stops minding that gap at all. 7. Betrayal sharpened her instincts. Here's the brutal gift that nobody asks for, but many spicy ladies eventually acknowledge. Betrayal sharpened her. It stripped away her tolerance for things that looked good, but felt wrong. It burned away her willingness to explain away red flags with generous interpretations to tighten the gap between what her gut said and how long it took her to act on it. Because here's what she learned the hard way. The gut always knew before the evidence was clear, before the pattern was undeniable, before the full truth surfaced. She had felt it, that low, quiet unease. That sense that something didn't add up, and she had talked herself out of it because trusting her instincts felt like being paranoid, and she'd rather be generous than suspicious. She doesn't make that trade anymore. This doesn't make her closed off. It doesn't make her walk through life waiting for people to disappoint her. It just means she moved her trust from words to patterns. She watches what people do over time. She pays attention to how they behave when it costs them something to be decent. She listens to the feeling in her body when something's off and she doesn't negotiate with it. That instinctual precision was bought with pain, and she carries it like the hard-won asset. It is point 8. Every boundary she holds is a scar that healed right. She didn't come into the world knowing where her lines were. None of us do. The only way to discover a boundary is to watch what happens when it gets crossed and feel what that cost you. The spicy lady has felt those costs. The yes she said when her whole body was saying no. The time she let something slide that she should have addressed and then watched it happen again and again, each time slightly worse. The relationship she stayed in past its expiration because leaving felt cruel, even as staying slowly made her someone she didn't recognize. Every single one of those experiences wrote something into her. A note that said, not this, never again this. And here's the thing about lessons written in that kind of ink. They don't fade. They don't get overridden by charm or pressure or the temporary discomfort of holding a line. They stick. Her boundaries aren't rigid because she's closed off. They're clear because she's educated. She's not saying no out of fear. She's saying no because she's already seen the movie, already knows how it ends, and she's decided she'd rather spend her energy differently. People who mistake her limits for coldness have never sat with someone who fully knows herself. There's nothing cold about it. It's actually one of the warmest things in the world. A woman clear enough about who she is to protect it. Point 9. She stopped needing to be understood. This is one of the quietest but most seismic shifts in the spicy lady's formation. The day she stopped needing everyone to understand her, for a long time, probably longer than she'd like to admit, she tried to explain herself. She gave context. She justified. She found different words and different angles in the hope that the right combination would finally make her legible to people who seemed determined to misread her. Her quietness was not coldness. Her independence was not rejection. Her standards were not arrogance. She knew this, but she kept trying to convince others of it, too. Until one day she just stopped. Not because she gave up, not because she became indifferent, but because she realized something clarifying. The people who were determined to misread her were going to do that regardless of what she said. And the people who actually paid attention had already understood her without needing an explanation. Releasing the need to be understood by everyone freed up an enormous amount of energy. Energy she'd been spending on justification, on managing perceptions, softening her edges for easier consumption that she could now put back into herself, into her work, into the connections that were actually worth having. She became comfortable being misread, comfortable being underestimated, because she knows exactly who she is, and that knowledge doesn't require consensus. Point 10. Her power looks like peace by the time the forging reaches a certain depth. Something shifts in how she carries herself, and it's not what people expect. People expect a spicy lady to walk into rooms wielding some kind of visible confidence, loud, assertive, taking up space in the way that's culturally coded as power. But that's not what it looks like at all. It looks like peace, settled, unhurried, completely unbothered by the metrics that govern how most people measure their worth. She doesn't need to win the conversation. She doesn't need to be the most impressive person in the room. She doesn't need the validation of being noticed, chosen, or approved of. She's already chosen herself, repeatedly, in hard moments where it would have been much easier not to. That peace is not passive. It's not the peace of someone who gave up. It's the peace of someone who fought long enough and for the right things to finally arrive at a relationship with herself that nothing external can easily destabilize. People feel it, even people who can't name it. There's something about her presence, unhurried, unperformative, quietly certain, that changes the temperature of a room in ways that no amount of loud confidence ever could. That is what the forging produces, not armor. Bedrock. 11. She chose growth when shrinking was easier. Every single stage of this process had an easier exit available. She could have decided at any of a dozen different inflection points that the work was too hard and the comfort of staying the same was preferable. She could have stayed in the relationship that was slowly eroding her rather than face the terrifying expanse of being on her own. She could have swallowed her standards and accepted whatever was available rather than sit with the discomfort of wanting more. She could have stopped questioning the conditioning and just become what was expected, smaller, quieter, more convenient. She didn't. And that choice, made repeatedly in real moments with real stakes, is the heart of what makes a spicy lady. Not the traits, not the archetype, the choice. The ongoing daily, sometimes grueling choice to stay faithful to herself even when everything around her offered good reasons to abandon that commitment. Growth was harder. Growth asked her to be honest about uncomfortable things, her own patterns, her own fears, the way she participated in her own diminishment. Growth meant staying in the discomfort long enough to actually move through it instead of around it. She chose it anyway, every time. That is not a personality trait. That is character. Built, earned, undeniably hers. So here we are, back at the beginning, except now you have the full picture. The spicy lady isn't a type you're born with, gifted at birth like eye color or height. She's something that gets built in the space between who you were and who you refuse to stop becoming. She was built by the early seasons of not fitting, by the love that cost too much, by the betrayals that sharpened her, by the solitude that showed her who she was when nobody was watching, by the conditioning she had to unlearn piece by piece, and the code she built to replace it. By the 1,000 small moments she chose herself when it would have been easier, so much easier not to. Every hard thing you've been through that felt like it was pulling you apart. It was putting something together, something stronger, something more honest, something that knows its own worth with the kind of certainty that doesn't need anyone else's confirmation. If you're in the middle of that fire right now, if you're in the disappointment, the misunderstanding, the loss, the uncomfortable stretch of becoming someone you can't fully see yet, hear this. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive, too complicated, too much, too difficult. You are in the forge, and the forge doesn't destroy what's real. It just burns away everything that was never really you to begin with. What's left, stripped back, pressure tested, tempered, is the truest version of yourself you've ever met. You are not finished being forged. None of us are. But the fire you've already survived, that wasn't lost. That was construction. You are not who you were before it. You are better, harder in the places that needed hardening, softer in the places that needed opening, and more completely yourself than you have ever been. The spicy lady isn't born, she's made. And you, reading this, carrying everything you carry, you are still being made. And that is not a flaw in the story. That is the whole beautiful, hard, extraordinary point of it.